Hello and welcome to my YouTube presentation entitled What Caused the Serb Exodus from Croatia During Operation Storm. My name is Luka Mišetić. I am an attorney in New York. I spent 7 years before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia as defense counsel in the case of General Ante Gotovina, which dealt extensively with Operation Storm. So I have spent many years looking at the evidence in the case. At the end of this presentation, hopefully you will have learned three important things about Operation Storm. The first is what caused the Serb exodus from Croatia during Operation Storm, which is the title of the presentation. The second important thing is that you will learn the critical role that General Ante Gotovina played in Croatia's victory in Operation Storm. And the third thing that you will hopefully learn is the importance of a little village in the southern part of Croatia known as Otrić, and the importance that that village played in Croatia's victory in Operation Storm and in the departure of Krajina Serb civilians and military from Croatia during Operation Storm. As I record this, it is August of 2020, and we are approaching the 25th anniversary of Operation Storm, which took place between 4 August and 8 August 1995. Every year around this time, tensions rise between Croatia and Serbia over the anniversary of Operation Storm. There are competing narratives between the two countries about the operation. Operation Storm is celebrated in Croatia because it liberated 10,400 square kilometers or 4,000 square miles of Croatia's territory that had been occupied by rebel Serb forces for more than 4 years. The territory liberated in Operation Storm accounted for almost 1/5 of Croatia's overall territory. Croatia celebrates the anniversary of Operation Storm every year on the 5th of August as a national holiday. In Croatia, it is known as Victory Day and the Day of Homeland Thanksgiving. In Serbia, the anniversary of Operation Storm is a day of national mourning. The Serbian view of Operation Storm is that it is the biggest ethnic cleansing in modern Europe, with the claim that hundreds of thousands of Serbs were expelled from Croatia by Croatian authorities in 1995. It is true that many Serbs left Croatia during Operation Storm, and these are some of the images of that departure. Many civilians packed up and left and exited Croatia in long columns that took several days, leaving for the Serb-occupied territory in Bosnia and Herzegovina, known as Republika Srpska, or going on to Serbia itself. But the key question that has to be asked is, why did the Serbs leave during Operation Storm? The issues and questions are, were they forcibly expelled by Croatia, or were they encouraged to leave by their own Serb leadership, which caused a panic among the civilian population and a mass exodus? These fundamentally contradictory historical narratives are at the center of the dispute between Serbia and Croatia, which arises every year in August during the anniversary of Operation Storm. In this video, I will explain the true reasons that caused the Serb population to leave Croatia in 1995. I want to spend just a few minutes on some basic background information prior to getting to Operation Storm itself, in case we have viewers who are not as familiar as many of the rest of us are about the events between 1991 and 1995 in Croatia. So, by the conclusion of the hostilities in 1991, Serb rebels occupied much of Croatia's territory, and you can see it here on this slide. It is the reddish colored territory here in the middle of Croatia that goes almost to the coast by Zadar, and here in the eastern part of Croatia, which is known as Eastern Slavonia. This was the status of Croatia's occupied territory from the end of 1991, basically until roughly the middle of 1995. At the end of the hostilities in 1991, the United Nations, the parties reached agreement on a peacekeeping force to enter into these territories, which Croatia viewed as occupied territories. The UN peacekeeping force was known as UNPROFOR, and it entered Croatia in 1992 with a mandate to reintegrate the occupied territories into the Croatian constitutional order. The UNPROFOR zones were broken up into 4 separate sectors, which will be relevant later on in my presentation. Sector East, which isn't part of our discussion today because it wasn't part of Operation Storm. Sector West, which was known as Western Slavonia, and which, as I will explain in a few minutes, was taken back by Croatia prior to Operation Storm, 3 months prior, in an operation known as Operation Flash in May 1995. And then 2 UN sectors here, Sector North and Sector South, which were the areas that Operation Storm affected in August 1995, and which Croatia took back in Operation Storm. In 1992, the war in Bosnia started. Serb forces seized control of almost 70% of Bosnian territory, and you can see that highlighted in blue here in the middle in this map of Bosnia and Herzegovina. By 1993, this was the military and political situation in both Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The green areas are areas controlled by the Army of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the middle, and here in the upper left-hand portion of Bosnia and Herzegovina known as the Bihać Pocket. The orange parts in Bosnia were controlled by the Croatian Defense Council, and then you see the status of the situation in Croatia, which is identical to what it was on the slide I previously showed you. The situation in the Bihać Pocket, which will be, again, important to understanding Operation Storm and why it took place. The Bihać Pocket is in the northwest corner of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1993, it was on one side surrounded by the rebel Serbs from the so-called Republic of Serbia and Krajina. On the eastern side, it was surrounded by the rebel Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina known as Republika Srpska. And within the Bihać Pocket, there were hostilities between 2 different Bosniak groups. One in the green is the legitimate government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the highlighted blue area is a breakaway entity that was headed by a man named Fikret Abdić, who was fighting against the legitimate government of Bosnia and Herzegovina and who had aligned himself with the Serb forces. So in effect, the blue area was also in union or in alliance with the Republic of Serbia and Krajina and the Republika Srpska, fighting against the legitimate forces of the Bosnian government in the Bihać Pocket. This will become very important later because, as you will see in the left-hand corner here, Croatian territory bordered the Republic of Serbia and Krajina, and As Serb forces in 1995 attacked the Bihać Pocket, Croatia became concerned that the elimination of the Bihać Pocket here would result in a contiguous Serbian territory that went from the Republic of Serbian Krajina through the Republika Srpska and to Serbia, which would have made it extremely difficult for Croatia to recover its occupied territory in the so-called Krajina. Now, although the Serb territories were divided in three so-called republics, which again would be the Republic of Serbian Krajina, the Republika Srpska, and Serbia itself, which was then within the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. All three Serbian entities and leaders acted in a coordinated fashion militarily. Bosnia and Croatia were militarily one battlefield, although separate countries. And that is extremely important to understand. Yes, there was a war in Croatia, and yes, there was a war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but the Serb leadership treated those two countries as one battlefield. And that will be important for Operation Storm, because you will see that Operation Storm took place not only in Croatia, but more importantly from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from which the main focus of Croatian attack came. So between 1992 and 1995, although the parties were supposed to be working on the peaceful reintegration of the so-called Krajina into the Croatian constitutional order, rebel Serb leaders rejected all peace plans for 4 years, including plans proposed by the United States, Russia, and the European Union, offering Serbs their own autonomous entity in Croatia with its own parliament and its own separate currency, its own police force even. This plan was known as Z4, but they rejected even that plan, which offered exceptional autonomy to the Serb minority in Croatia, because they refused even to accept the principle that this territory should be reintegrated into the Croatian constitutional order. And with that background information, I'd like to now discuss the chronology of events that led up to Operation Storm. You cannot understand the events of Operation Storm without understanding the events that led up to it. On the 1st of May, 1995, Croatia launches Operation Flash to retake Western Slavonia, also known as UN Sector West. And I pointed that out to you in the earlier slide. That is the orange area on this slide. And this is the area captured by Croatian forces in Operation Flash in Sector West. This took place 3 months prior to Operation Storm. So the events of Operation Flash were very much still fresh in the minds of all actors in Operation Storm, both on the Croatian and the Serbian side, as well as in the international community. Croatia conducted the military operation in Western Slavonia with full respect for the laws of war and for the rights of the Serbs who were in Western Slavonia. And this was confirmed by the United Nations, which itself, through its Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, praised Croatia's treatment of Serb civilians in Western Slavonia. Human Rights Watch reviewed Croatia's actions in Operation Flash and concluded that, quote, in general, the operation was professionally conducted, and based on the evidence available as of June 10, violations of the rules of war appear not to have been widespread. Nevertheless, despite Croatia's efforts to treat its Serb minority in Western Slavonia well, many Serbs left Western Slavonia, and the Serb leadership in the so-called Krajina insisted that Serbs could not live under Croatian control in Western Slavonia and demanded that the UN evacuate the remaining Serbs in Western Slavonia to Serb-controlled areas of Bosnia. As a result, the United Nations agreed to evacuate Serbs who wished to leave in a UN operation known as Operation Safe Passage. Now, what's important about this is these evacuations of Serbs from Western Slavonia were conducted after the military operation was completed, and despite the best efforts of Croatian authorities to convince the Serbs who remained to stay in Western Slavonia. Operation Safe Passage was a United Nations operation to evacuate thousands of Serbs from Croatia over several weeks after Operation Flash in Western Slavonia had been completed. Serbs were interviewed and promised full rights if they stayed, but many chose to leave via the UN for Serb-controlled territory in Bosnia.
The situation here is that the United Nations has been asked by the local population, in agreement with the Bosnian and Croatian governments, to help move civilians from this area down across the Sava Bridge, to hand them over to relief agencies on the south side of the bridge. The message was given today, or last night, to the local population here that we would be explaining this to them here today, and the population from this area alone at the moment is coming here to this area in order to have an interview with the Croatian authorities in which they're explaining the rights they would have as Croatian citizens. And once that has been complete, they're having an interview with the United Nations where they can speak freely and explain whether they wish to leave or not. The indications are that those people whose families are united here, many of them want to stay and many of them want to leave. And I have not accurate figures as to exactly what those numbers are at the moment.
The Serb departure from Western Slavonia in May and June 1995 showed Croatian and UN leaders that Serbs would leave the remaining occupied areas of Croatia if Croatia launched a military operation, as ultimately happened in Operation Storm in 1995. In other words, the events that happened in Operation Flash in May showed that Serb leaders would encourage Serb civilians to leave rather than stay in a Croatia and in a so-called Krajina, which was incorporated into the Croatian constitutional order. And this is important because it needs to be understood that everyone knew that Croatian Serbs would depart rather than, many of them, obviously not all of them, but many Croatian Serbs would depart rather than choose to live in an independent Croatia. Now, in July 1995, Serb forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia began to commence military operations to consolidate their territory in advance of anticipated peace negotiations and the negotiated settlement of the wars in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, between the 6th of July and the 11th of July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces attack the UN safe haven of Srebrenica. On the 11th of July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces led by General Ratko Mladic seized and entered Srebrenica in an operation known as Krivaja. This video is of General Mladic entering with his army into Srebrenica on the 11th of July.
Skini ovu tablu, ulica Selmanagić, Reuk, Crnik. Skinite to. Hajde. Penji se, bre, čoveče, nemoj da ti govorim 10 puta i po nešto. Nakon Srebrenica. Na današnji dan.
Dve godine, 11. jula, čestitam. Ovo je slobodno. Sad smo se našli, bravo,
Evo nas 11. jula 1995. godine u srpskoj Srebrenici. Uoči još jednog velikog praznika srpskoga, poklanjamo srpskom narodu ovaj grad i napokon došao je trenutak da se posle bune protiv Dahija točnim osvetimo na ovom prostoru.
And in fact, General Mladić's forces did, quote unquote, exact revenge by committing genocide between the 13th and 22nd of July 1995, when the Bosnian Serb army murdered over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys in what 2 UN courts would later conclude was an act of genocide. Between the 14th and the 25th of July 1995, after taking Srebrenica, Bosnian Serb forces attack and seize the UN safe haven of Žepa. And meanwhile, on the 19th of July 1995, the Croatian Serb and Bosnian Serb forces, combined with the forces of Fikret Abdić in the Bihać pocket, and I mentioned this in the earlier slide, so the areas in yellow, pink, and blue on this slide, launch a coordinated attack on the forces of the 5th Corps of the Bosnian Army, which is the green area in this slide, in order to seize the Bihać pocket, which again is the territory in the northwest corner of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, this effort to take the Bihać pocket was only approximately 2 weeks before Operation Storm took place. The military commander of the Krajina Serb forces, General Mile Mrkšić, testified that the operation against the Bihać pocket was launched in July 1995 because, quote, the Republic of Serbian Krajina was thinnest in the stretch from Ogulin to Bihać, and you see that in the red box on your screen there on the slide, and, quote, the hinterland had to be assured so that you would have your back covered, because it was difficult for us to hold the line that was in front of us against the Croatian army, and let alone the line that faced the 5th Corps, meaning the Bosnian army. So what General Mrkšić was saying was they launched this operation to eliminate the Bihać pocket, precisely because the so-called Krajina was thinnest in that area in the red box that I have highlighted there. They wanted to eliminate that green area in the red box, so that they would have a contiguous Serbian territory stretching from Croatia, going through Bosnia, through that corridor in the north of Bosnia, and linking directly with Serbia. Now, Croatia, precisely for that reason, could not allow the Bihać pocket to fall. If Bihać fell, Serb forces would have that continual control of a unified block of territory from nearly Zagreb all the way to Serbia. The fall of Bihać would have made it extremely difficult for Croatia to recover its occupied territories. On the 22nd of July 1995, faced with the Bosnian Serb attacks to seize UN safe areas in eastern and western Bosnia, Bosnian President Izetbegović calls upon Croatia to intervene militarily in Bosnia to defend the Bihać pocket. The Split Agreement, as it is known, was signed on the 22nd of July 1995 between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and allowed the Croatian army to operate in the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The agreement named Croatian General Ante Gotovina as commander of Croatian forces, which was a term meant to identify the combined forces of the Croatian army and the Croatian Defense Council, which was the military organization of the Bosnian Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he was charged to lead operations in Bosnian territory. 3 days after the split agreement was signed, between the 25th and the 28th of July 1995, Croatian forces seized the Bosnian towns of Grahovo and Glamoch from Bosnian Serb forces in an operation known as Operation Summer 95, which relieved the pressure on the Bihać pocket by forcing the Serb forces to abandon the attack on Bihać in order to defend in the south from the advancing attack of the Croatian army. And the territory that was seized by General Gotovina's forces in Operation Summer 95 is highlighted in the red box on the slide that you see in front of you. The seizure of Bosansko Grahovo by Croatian forces was absolutely crucial to understanding what happened in Operation Storm. The capture of Bosansko Grahovo placed Knin itself in a perilous position because until that point, the main supply link between Knin and Banja Luka and Serbia ran right through Grahovo. And I have put a Google map on the screen in front of you by which you can see the main road out of Knin goes to Strmica through Bosansko Grahovo, which is the area in the red box, to Drvar and on to Banja Luka. After Operation Summer 95, Croatian forces under General Gotovina's command controlled that territory of Bosansko Grahovo, which meant Knin no longer had a direct connection to Bosnian Serb, the Bosnian Serbs, and to Serbia itself, and it was now increasingly isolated. By seizing Grahovo, Croatian forces again cut off the shortest resupply route, which was the Knin, Strmica, Grahovo, Petrovac, Banja Luka road, and also seized the high ground on the Dinara mountain range above the Knin Valley. And you see that in a large red box that I have highlighted there. That is the Dinara mountain range overlooking Knin to the left, which is in a valley. And that will be also important to understanding Operation Storm. After losing their main link through Grahovo to Serb-held territory in Bosnia and Serbia, the Krajina Serb leadership in Knin was left with one road to link the Republika Srpska and Serbia, the Knin, Otrić, Serb, Martin Brod, Petrovac, and Banja Luka route. As you will see shortly, this fact would later become critical to understanding why the Krajina Serbs left Croatia. And in the slide I have in front of you, I have particularly highlighted the place known as Otrić. As I said at the beginning of my remarks, hopefully by the end of this presentation you will understand the critical importance of Otrić to Croatia's victory in Operation Storm. And you see its relationship to Bosansko Grahovo, which I've also highlighted. That route had been taken away, as I mentioned, and the only route left out of Knin was that road that goes through Otrić. The Serb leadership in Krajina understood the dramatic consequences of the Croatian army's seizure of Bosansko Grahovo. On the 28th of July, 1995, the Krajina Serb response to the loss of Grahovo was issued by the so-called president of the Krajina, Milan Martić, who declared a state of war and ordered curfews on the streets. Many Serbs in the Knin area already began to pack their cars and leave the Krajina region for Bosnian Serb-held territory in Bosnia and for Serbia itself in anticipation of a potential Croatian attack. As I mentioned earlier, the Bosnian Serbs and the Krajina Serbs acted in a coordinated fashion. For them, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were one military battlefield. And so with the loss of Grahovo, they needed to prepare an immediate military response. and therefore on the 30th of July 1995, less than 5 days before Operation Storm would begin, Ratko Mladic came from Bosnia to Knin in order to prepare a joint military response by the Krajina Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs. The Serb leadership knew that with the fall of Grahovo, Knin was in danger. The following is a video of a press conference given by General Mladic in Knin on the 30th of July.
Mislim da su hrvatske snage jako puno razvučene sada na teritoriju prema linijama obrane naših srpskih obrambenih snaga. Koliko to u strategiji može pomoći za uspješni strateški udarac, za upraćanje i uzalaganje puno naših prostora?
Pa ja ne bi na vaše pitanje, vaše dobro i vi ispoljavate novinarsku radoznalost, ne bi ja na vaše pitanje odgovarao sa punom preciznošću. Naredno vreme će da pokaže i da odgovore na vaše pitanje.
Kako je trenutna situacija na Grahovsku na vašem ratištu?
Hrvatske oružane formacije su izvršile napade i one su ušle u Grahovo i delom u Glamoč, no ja se nadam da ćemo mi to veoma brzo povratiti kao i druge okupirane teritorije Srpske republike.
On the 31st of July, the first orders of the Krajina Serb and the Bosnian Serb army are issued in response to the Croatian offensive. And the Serb strategy to defend Knin and Krajina depended on General Mladic's Bosnian Serb forces mounting a counterattack against General Gotovina's forces in the area of Grahovo in order to put General Gotovina on the defensive and prevent him from attacking Krajina. And ultimately, their objective was to retake Grahovo and remove the threat to Knin. And so what you see in the slide now is what the Krajina Serbs and the Bosnian Serbs hoped to achieve: to occupy Croatian forces, prevent them from turning left here and going on attack towards Knin, and instead having to defend themselves from an attack by General Mladic's forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The one practical problem that the Krajina and Bosnian Serbs had was that the Croatian offensive in Operation Summer 95 had routed the Bosnian Serb forces that had been defending Grahovo, and those forces were essentially destroyed and could not quickly regroup. And so the Serbs were not in a position to immediately launch a counterattack. Because General Mladic had moved most of his offensive forces to eastern Bosnia to attack the safe haven enclaves in Srebrenica and Žepa, he needed to now transfer those attacking forces, fuel, and supplies from eastern Bosnia to western Bosnia in order to be able to launch the counterattack. And you see that on the arrow in the slide that I have in front of you. He needs to move those attacking forces from the east to the west in order to be able to mount that counterattack against General Gotovina's forces in the Grahovo area. This is just a slide showing the status of forces as of the 31st of July, 1995. You'll see that on this blue line is where the Croatian forces are. They have Grahovo and Glamoch under their control. They are facing in Bosnia the 2nd Krajina Corps of the Bosnian Serb army, which is not in a position to be able to attack Grahovo. And so on that day, the 31st of July, General Mladic issues an order to move the East Bosnia Corps to the 2nd Krajina Corps in western Bosnia. On this slide, you can also see that Knin is being defended by the 7th Knin Corps, and they are positioned in a town called Strmica, which I showed you on a slide before, but I will show you on the next slide as well. Now, on the same day that General Mrkšić was planning his defense of Knin, the Croatian military leadership was meeting on Brioni to discuss the strategy to retake the so-called Krajina. This is now the famous Brioni meeting, which has been written about extensively. It was recorded both on audio and a subsequent transcript of the meeting, and was discussed extensively in the Gotovina case before the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague. Now, the transcript is very important because it reveals what the strategy of the Croatian military was as of the 31st of July 1995. The key points discussed and agreed by Croatian military officials were discussed at this Brioni meeting. They knew that they now had the upper hand with the seizure of Grahovo and the threat to Knin itself, but they knew they had to act quickly for two reasons. First, they knew that the Bosnian Serbs were attempting to move forces from eastern to western Bosnia in order to counterattack General Gotovina's forces and recover Grahovo, which would take the advantage away from Croatia. Second, they knew that if they launched the operation and did not finish it quickly, Croatia would suffer serious diplomatic damage. And so in this first excerpt that I have on the slide, this is President Tudjman speaking, and he says, "We enjoy the sympathy of the United States, but to a certain extent. If, gentlemen, you will carry out the operation professionally, as you did in Western Slavonia within a few days, and that means 3 to 4 days, or a maximum of 8 days, then we can count on the fact that we will not sustain any political damage, but will instead have scored political points in such a world." And Miroslav Tudjman, who was the head of Croatian intelligence services, said, quote, "You must take into account that if this is postponed, meaning Operation Storm, for 2 days, that means that they will have 4 or 5 days until the end of the operation. They will have time to transfer those forces, and you will be subject to an attack over there." And that's referencing General Mladić's forces being transferred to attack General Gotovina's forces. That's their only chance to weaken the pressure on Knin. Therefore, it will be necessary to determine there will be pressure, and you must count on that. So, essentially, both sides understood that this was a race against the clock. The key was, can Croatia complete an operation before General Mladić has an opportunity to transfer forces from eastern Bosnia to Grahovo to launch the attack on General Gotovina's forces. If one carefully reviews the Brioni transcript of 31 July 1995, you will see that the plan of attack that was agreed at that meeting was in fact not the way the attack unfolded on the 4th of August 1995. The first strategic stage of the Brioni plan consisted of seizing Ljubovo, which is the area marked in the red box on the slide, placing Udbina under control, as well as an attack by the Split Military District and MUP special forces from the slopes of Mount Velebit to Gračac. This first stage would not last more than 2 or 3 days and would include a breakthrough to the north and south of the Plitvice Lakes in order to remove the danger of an attack against Zagreb, Karlovac, and Sisak. This way, the so-called Krajina would be cut in half, and all the vital facilities would be under control, and the conditions for the second stage, which was expected to last as long as the first one, would be in place. So just so that we have a clear understanding of what the attack, first stage of the attack was supposed to be, as discussed at Brioni, if you follow the arrow, the intent was to launch an attack that would essentially cut the so-called Krajina in two. And it was thought that this would make it easier to then launch the second stage of the attack and to try to take additional territory, including an attack by General Gotovina's forces. General Gotovina's forces in the Grahovo area were not planned to be a critical part of the initial attack, but would instead feign an attack from Grahovo towards Strmica on the road to Knin. The plan was to introduce the 4th and 7th Guards Brigades under General Gotovina's command only in the second stage of the operation, after the first 2 days of the operation were complete. Now, it's important to emphasize that the participants in the Brioni meeting did not discuss expelling Serbs from the so-called Krajina. Because Serbs had left Western Slavonia 3 months earlier, despite generally good conduct by Croatian forces, and because Serbs were already leaving Knin with the fall of Grahovo, the participants in the meeting anticipated that Serbs would leave if the operation was successful, meaning if the operation was successfully recovering Croatian territory. They did not discuss forcibly expelling Serb civilians. They planned to leave escape routes so Serb forces could have the option to flee rather than to force them to fight by leaving them no escape routes. Now, what most people do not realize is that the Krajina Serbs knew of the plan that had been agreed at Brioni. On the 3rd of August, in other words, the day before Operation Storm began, General Mladic issued the order to commence an attack on General Gotovina's forces on 5 August to retake Grahovo. This offensive operation was codenamed Vaganj, and if you read his order, the left-hand slide says the first phase of the operation shall last 6 to 8 days. During that phase, Grahovo shall be liberated and enemy forces in Grahovsko Polje and Shator Mountain destroyed, etc. And on the right-hand side, you will see the slide that says the immediate readiness for defense. The attack shall commence at 5 August at 0600 hours. In other words, General Mladic was preparing to attack General Gotovina's forces the day after Croatia launched Operation Storm. So on the 3rd of August, the scene was set. Serb forces were prepared for the Croatian attack. They had sent their special forces to the place where the Croatian army had planned to launch an attack to cut the Krajina in two. They were prepared to defend their front lines and to stall the Croatian attack so that the Bosnian Serbs could launch their counterattack and reclaim Grahovo. They were also aware that if they could defend for a few days, Croatia would be condemned diplomatically and would be forced to give up the operation. But on the 3rd of August, 1995, General Gotovina changed the attack plans and changed history. The Brioni participants had planned for General Gotovina's forces to be decoys during the first phase of Operation Storm. But on the 3rd of August, 1995, General Gotovina received permission directly from his commander-in-chief, President Franjo Tudjman, to change his plan. Instead of being a decoy, and rather than wait to be attacked by Mladic's forces, General Gotovina proposed to take Knin immediately and to destroy the entire defense of the Republika Srpska Krajina by taking its capital city. President Tudjman approved. General Gotovina decided to activate both the 4th and the 7th Guards Brigades and surprise attack Knin by coming not through Grahovo-Strmica-Knin road, which the Krajina Serb army had defended, but instead by coming over the top of the Dinara mountain range using a gravel road. The Krajina Serb army had not put combat troops on the Dinara mountain and therefore were not prepared to mount a proper defense to such an attack. Because General Gotovina changed his plan so late in the preparation, Serb intelligence services did not have an opportunity to learn of Gotovina's plan to attack Knin immediately. General Mrkšić admitted this when he testified in the Gotovina trial 11 years ago, that he had prepared for the Croatian attack in Sector North and was not anticipating an attack from the direction of Grahovo. Now, General Mrkšić testified in the trial of General Gotovina in The Hague over 10 years ago, and he testified about the fact that he had been surprised by the attack by General Gotovina from the direction of the Dinara and Grahovo, and stated that his intelligence services had him planning for an attack coming from sector north to cut the Krajina in two, which is exactly what the initial Croatian plan of attack was. So the first video you will see is General Mrkšić testifying in Serbian. If you wish to skip ahead to the English translation, you can go ahead and skip ahead approximately 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes in this video.
Su snage rezervne, znači moje snage koje su glavnog štaba, komandanta glavnog štaba, odnosno komandanta vrhovnog štaba Martića za aktivna dejstva u slučaju agresije na pravce koji mogu biti ugroženi. I protivdesantna borba na komunikaciji Slunj Rakovica. Ne znam zašto smo mi predviđali da će hrvatska strana imati desante neke, ali smo se toga stvarno plašili. Sad, znači ove pravce aktivnih dejstava usaglasiti sa komandama korpusa, sa Banijskim i sa 21. Kordunaškim.
Razumijem, ovo o čemu vi govorite je, vi niste sigurni zašto ste pretpostavljali da će hrvatske snage izvršiti desant u sektoru sjever, tako?
Nigdje koliko se osjeća. Ali je neko, moje obavještajne službe, neko im je nafilovo to. Desant.
Da, ali da bi to bilo u sektoru sjever, je li tako?
Ja smatrao sam da je tu najoptimalnija Hrvatska da preseče Republiku Srpsku Krajinu na Banijski i Kordunaški od Ličkog i Dalmatinskog. Nisam računao na ovo što se desilo sa Grahova.
And this is the English translation of General Mrkšić's testimony on the surprise attack by General Gotovina from the direction of Grahovo.
It's correct. Go ahead and finish your answer, General.
Yes.
These reserve forces, in other words, my forces, the forces of the commander of the Supreme Staff, that's to say Martić, they were there in case an aggression was launched to engage in active combat along the axis that might possibly be threatened. And then the Slunj-Rakovica road, I don't know why it was that we assumed that the Croatian forces would have some sort of landing operations. We were obviously fearful of them. The axis of active combat should be coordinated with the Banja and the Kordun corps.
Understood, and what you're talking about is you're not sure why you assume that the Croatian forces would have some sort of landing operation up in Sector North, yes?
Uopšte nije bilo desanta nigdje.
To the best of my recollection, there were no landing operations, but obviously somebody fed this information to our intelligence services.
Be up in Sector North, correct?
Yes.
Yes. I believe that was the best area for Croatian army to cut off the Banja and Kordun from Lika and Dalmatia corps. I didn't count on what would subsequently happen with Grahovo.
Now, it's correct. Go ahead and finish your answer, General.
Yes. These reserve forces, in other words,
my forces, the forces of the commander of the Supreme Staff, that's to say Martic, they were there in case an aggression was launched to engage in active combat along the axis that might possibly be threatened. And then the Slunj-Rakovica road. I don't know why it was that we assumed that the Croatian forces would have some sort of landing operations. We were obviously fearful of them. The axis of active combat should be coordinated with the Banja and the Kordun corps.
Understood. And what you're talking about is you're not sure why you assume that the Croatian forces would have some sort of landing operation up in Sector North, yes?
Uopšte nije bilo desanta nigdje.
To the best of my recollection, there were no landing operations, but obviously somebody fed this information to our intelligence services.
Be up in Sector North, correct?
Yes.
Yes. I believe that was the best area for Croatian army to cut off the Banja and Kordun from Lika and Dalmatia corps. I didn't count on what would subsequently happen with Grahovo.
Now, so that was the status of the military planning for Operation Storm. And now we get to the beginning of Operation Storm itself. And I will go through a reconstruction of the events of that day and a reconstruction of the Krajina Serb exodus from Croatia. Now, by the end of the first day of Operation Storm, the Croatian army had not advanced very far at all on the front lines. In this slide, you will see the status of forces at the end of the first day of Operation Storm. The pink area is still the territory held by the Krajina Serb army. The blue arrows show how far the Croatian army had advanced after one day of conflict. And from this map, you can see that the Krajina Serb defenses were quite good. They had limited Croatian advances significantly and were holding their territory well. The only incursions that you can really see are in the south, here in the Knin area, here in the Velebit area of General Markać's forces, and here up in the north in the Dubica area. Otherwise, the Serb defenses were holding quite well. So if the Croatian army did not make much progress along the front lines on the 4th of August, why did Serb forces and civilians leave on the evening of 4 August from the Knin area? The key to understanding the departure of the Krajina Serbs lies in a village called Otrić, and that's the village circled in yellow on the slide on your screen. The importance of Otrić is that it is the last escape route out of Knin and the southern Krajina, as I had mentioned earlier. The last road went Knin, Otrić, Martin Brod, Bosanski Petrovac in Bosnia. Now, as I mentioned before, the Krajina Serb army had planned to defend Knin by defending the Grahovo-Strmica-Knin road, and General Mrkšić had placed his combat forces in Strmica to wait for any eventual attack by General Gotovina's forces along the road coming from Bosansko Grahovo. But while the Serb army was defending at Strmica, General Gotovina attacked over the Dinara Mountains in an area known as Crvena Zemlja, or the Red Land. Because the Krajina Serb army was not anticipating an attack at Crvena Zemlja, they assigned a police unit to defend the main thrust of General Gotovina's attack, where he was sending 2 brigades. And you can see on this map, the blue is the direction of the Croatian army attack with the 4th Guards Brigade and the 7th Guards Brigade. Strmica is to the north, the yellow dot. That's where General Mrkšić has his combat troops, but the Croatian attack did not come over that main road. So if you look at a map on the 4th of August of where the attacks were coming from, the black box on the right is the attack of General Gotovina's forces over the Dinara mountain towards Knin. Otrić is highlighted in yellow, and General Markać's forces are attacking from the Velebit mountain range, trying to break through at a place called Mali Alan, to break through there and then move towards Gračac. Now, what both the Serb military and the Croatian army knew was that if Otrić falls to General Gotovina's and General Markać's forces, then the whole... So at 0500 on the 4th of August 1995, Croatian forces commenced their attack to retake the so-called Krajina by launching an artillery attack on military objects intending to disrupt command, control, and communication of Krajina Serb forces. The initial assault on Knin lasted approximately 45 minutes. Krajina Serb military intelligence reports from inside Knin on that morning confirmed that the Croatian army was targeting military objectives, not civilians. It is important to note that there are no known victims of shelling in Knin during Operation Storm. No dead and no injured. By 10 a.m. on the 4th of August, Croatian artillery continued to pound Serb positions on their defense lines on the Dinara mountain, and by 10 a.m. on the 4th of August, the police units defending their positions started to retreat, but the 7th Knin Corps tried to hold Serb positions on the Dinara. This is a report of the Serb general of the 7th Knin Corps, General Slobodan Kovačević, who reported that, quote, already at around 1000 hours on the 4th of August, the forces of the police battalion that were holding the positions on the Dinara mountain started retreating in an organized manner, which resulted in the retreat of the remaining units of the 7th Corps. Although the 7th Corps tried to further retain the positions at the Dinara, due to the weak entrenchment and suppression and the horrible pressure on the unaccustomed soldiers imposed by the Ustasha artillery, the dominant positions were abandoned and only parts of the units occupied in a disorganized manner the unprepared positions in the depth of the axis Igla, Crvena Zemlja, Knin. Now, while fighting was going on up in the Dinara mountain, the situation in Knin was still quite calm amongst the civilian population. At 14:15 or 2:15 p.m. on the 4th of August 1995, the UN spokesman in Knin, Alan Roberts, appeared live on CNN and reported that, quote, there is no panic in Knin and that, quote, it is rather calm, but people are rather concerned about what may follow next. It is clear that the morning shelling in and around Knin had not caused panic among the civilian population in Knin. Now, we also have the benefit of seeing the reports that were being issued by the Krajina Serb military to its superiors in Belgrade. And this is a report issued at 14:30, meaning 2:30 p.m. on the 4th of August 1995, by General Mrkšić to General Perišić in Belgrade, reporting that the Croatian army has made a breach of Serb defense lines in the Dinara mountain at Crvena Zemlja. He reported, quote, the enemy is conducting a forceful attack from Grahovo over Dinara and towards Crvena Zemlja. By 14:30 hours, they succeeded to make a breach towards Crvena Zemlja. There is danger that the defense of Knin might be jeopardized from the heading of Crvena Zemlja. At 1500 or 3 p.m. on the 4th of August, General Mrkšić is interviewed on Radio Belgrade and reports that the Krajina Serb army was still, quote, firmly in control of the front line. The Croatian army was unable to seriously breach our lines, except on the route leading from Grahovo via Crvena Zemlja to Knin. Mrkšić was correct. The Croatian army had made very little progress on the front lines, and the breach on the Dinara mountain was the only threat because it had come as a surprise attack. And this slide shows just how right General Mrkšić was. The Croatian army had not made much progress anywhere in the so-called Krajina after the first day of Operation Storm, other than, as you can see in the two boxes, the breakthrough by General Gotovina's forces at the Dinara mountain, and the other box is where, as you will see in a minute, the breakthrough started to happen by General Markać's special police forces on the Velebit. At 1600 hours on the 4th of August, or 4 p.m., Krajina Serb intelligence reports to Belgrade that the Croatian army had taken over the dominant peaks on the Dinara and was poised to break into the vicinity of Knin. They also reported that the Croatian special police under General Markać's command were starting to breach Serb lines at the Velebit mountain and that Gračac was potentially in danger. I quote from the report, "On the axis Grahovo-Crvena Zemlja-Knin, the Ustasha have succeeded in taking over the dominant peaks and creating favorable conditions for the continuation of their activities and breaking out into the immediate vicinity of Knin." So as of 1600 hours, 4 p.m. on the 4th of August, the Serb leadership in Knin was now facing a scenario where General Gotovina's forces and General Markać's forces might link at Otrić and encircle them if the Serb forces could not hold off General Markać's special police forces on the Velebit mountain. Also at 4 p.m., General Mladić informed Martić and Mrkšić that he will be unable to mount a counterattack against General Gotovina's forces the next day because he cannot move his forces from eastern Bosnia in time. And you can see on this map, again, the threat of encirclement that at Otrić, that was now a very real threat because of the breakthroughs by General Gotovina and General Markać. At 1630 or 4:30 p.m. on the 4th of August, faced with the immediate threat that the HV would move on Knin and they would face encirclement at Otrić, Milan Martić and General Mrkšić call the so-called RSK Prime Minister, Milan Babić, in Belgrade and agree to evacuate the civilians and Knin. And this is a transcript of their phone conversation, which was recorded at 1630, which is in the circle in the slide on your screen. And the conversation says, should I go down there to Knin, do something to make this stop? That's what Mrkšić is telling Babić in Belgrade. And Babić responds, listen, there is nothing that can be done. Pull the people out of there. And Mrkšić responds, all right, we are starting to do that. And then in the box, the conversation continues on. Milan, meaning Milan Babić, is being spoken to. From the Supreme Council of Defense, only the general and I, meaning I, Milan Martić, are here, so we are thinking of extracting the women and children. And Babić responds, there is no other option. I talked to Galbraith an hour ago. Judging from what he said, I don't think they'll stop. Conduct every action as planned. And the answer is, so that means that we're extracting, does it? So the decision is made amongst so-called President Martić, so-called Prime Minister Babić, and General Mrkšić to order the evacuation of Serb civilians from the southern part of the so-called Krajina. General Mrkšić admitted that the fear of encirclement at Otrić triggered the decision to evacuate the Krajina Serb population.
What I'm asking you is, agreed, the Strmica Grahovo road you had been cut off there. And is your testimony then that if you had to do an evacuation out of Knin, you would have had to go up that road from Knin to Otrich, and then from Otrich to Srb to your reserve command post? Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Now...
Oh, no. Yes. It was the Supreme Council that issued, made a decision, and an order was issued. I think you have it there. That was the only solution that we were left with, or to fight in an encirclement at the cost of many human lives, or to evacuate to the territory from Otrich to Srb that was under the control of the RSK army.
Let me, while we're on this topic, let me jump ahead.
At 1645, Colonel Kosta Novakovic, assistant to the commander of the RSK Army main staff, was called to a meeting by General Mrkšić to discuss, quote, what to do with the civilian population, close quote. Novakovic was told to draft the order to evacuate the civilian population of the southern Krajina. He testified in his own words about that meeting. For those of you that don't understand Serbian and wish to skip ahead to the English translation, you can skip ahead about 4 minutes and 38 seconds in this video.
Upravo sam došao do tog pitanja. Znači, mene je negdje oko 16:40 i 30 časova pozvao general Mrkšić. Pitao me šta radim, da ja sad to ne prepričam, i rekao, daj ti dođi da se dogovorimo, da vidimo zapravo. Moramo vidjeti šta ćemo sa stanovništvom, jer je stanovništvo ugroženo. Kod mene je u kancelariji predsjednik Martić, tu je general Lončar, načelnik štaba, tu je, još je rekao ja od ministara, ja sad ne mogu sjetiti se ko je bio, ali dolazi ministar Kovačević koji je ministar informisanja i gradonačelnik Knina. I treba da vidimo šta ćemo dalje raditi. I ja sam bio u kancelariji, znači, već za 2-3 minuta. Kad sam došao u kancelariju Mrkšića, upravo kod Mrkšića, generala, tu su bili ovi ljudi koje sam ja napomenuo. I onda je Mrkšić ukratko iznio situaciju. Doslovno je rekao, predsjednik Martić je razgovarao sa premijerom Babićem koji se nalazi u Beogradu. Babić, kao što znamo, bio je na sastanku sa ambasadorom SAD gospodinom Peterom Galbraithom. I mislim da Hrvatska neće stati. Sljedeće, predsjednik Martić je razgovarao sa Beogradom i sa Palama. Ja pretpostavljam, nije se izjasnio, a pretpostavljam sa Miloševićem i sa Karadžićem. Sad ja to pretpostavljam, a vjerojatno je tako tačno. Konsultovao sam ministra odbrane i ministra unutrašnjih poslova, jer su oni, pored predsjednika Martića i pored komandanta, članovi, znači, Vrhovnog savjeta odbrane. I kažem, mi smo odlučili da trebamo evakuirati stanovništvo iz Dalmacije, znači to su opštine Knin, Benkovac, Obrovac, Drniš, i iz opštine Gračac u Lici. Zbog čega to nisam završio ovu priču? Zato što je postala opasnost da se praktično preko Malog Alana presječe taj put koji je jedini put koji vodi ka unutrašnjosti, put preko Otrića, preko Gračaca. Znači Dalmacija i stanovništvo i vojska bila u jednom okruženju. Sad ja ne bih htio da zloupotrebljam vreme. A ako bude trebalo, mogu kasnije objasniti, a mi znamo kako su srpske jedinice i srpsko stanovništvo završavali kad su bili u okruženju. I da se sad vratim na samu odluku. Meni je rečeno da ja dobio sam, znači, da se stanovništvo treba iseliti, odnosno preseliti, da se razmjesti u Otrić i Srbi preko otiće zapravo Srbi Lapac i da ja napišem takvu odluku. Nisu mi puno objašnjavali, ali su rekli također da vidim ja sa komandom UNPROFOR-a, pošto je to moj sektor posla, da vidim s njima mogu li se oni angažovati. I ja sam otišao u susjednu kancelariju, napravio sam ovu odluku. Tu sam, vidite koliko to negdje od 16:45 do 17:20, znači do 17:10 dok sam ja tamo. To mi je trebalo, znači, skoro 20 minuta, pola sata. Zašto sam ja to sam kucao? Kucao sam sam zato da ne bi to neko sa strane kucao daktilograf ili neko da se ne napravi neka uzbuna u komandi, tako. Je to bilo ipak diskretno, samo sa par ljudi. Tu sam ja napravio neke greške na mašini, ali to sad nije bitno, bila je mašina električna, ja sam kucao sa ovom, do tada sam, ono, kako se zove, mehaničkom. I oni su to, sad, ja sam to donio i predsjednik je to potpisao.
This is the English translation of the testimony of Colonel Novakovic concerning the meeting at 16:45 or 4:45 p.m. on the 4th of August, where the Krajina Serb leadership decided to evacuate the civilian population from the southern part of the so-called Krajina. If you wish to skip the English translation, you can skip ahead in this video by 4 minutes and 57 seconds.
Let me take you back to D-137, the decision, and you said you authored it. Was that on your own initiative, or did someone ask you to prepare this?
Upravo sam došao do tog pitanja.
I was just about to come to that point. At 16:30 hours, General Mrkšić summoned me and asked me what I was doing. He told me, why don't you come over so that we could see what we are going to do with the population since it's at risk. President Martić was in my office, General Lončar, the Chief of Staff, was there. He said also that there was one of the ministers there with him. And then Minister Kovačević, the Minister of Information and Knin Mayor, arrived. And he said, and we have to see what we were going to do next. I reached his office in less than 2 to 3 minutes. As I stepped into Mr. Mrkšić's office, General Mrkšić's office, I already found all the individuals I mentioned there. Mr. Mrkšić then briefed us on the situation and said, literally, President Martić spoke with Prime Minister Babić, who is in Belgrade. Babić, as we all know, attended the meeting with the U.S. Ambassador Peter Galbraith. And I think that Croatia will not stop. President Martić spoke with Belgrade and Pale. My presumption was, although he didn't say that in so many words, that he spoke with Milošević and Karadzic. I consulted the defense minister and the minister of the interior, because they, in addition to President Martić and commander, were members of the Supreme Defense Council. And he said, we decided that we ought to evacuate the population out of Dalmatia. Knin, Benkovac, Obrovac and Drniš were the municipalities involved, and out of the Gračac municipality in Lika. Now why? I didn't finish the story. Because there was the danger that practically across Malayalam the route would be cut off, which was the only route leading toward the hinterland via Otočac. In Dalmatia, the army and the entire population would find themselves encircled. I do not wish to abuse your time. If need be, I can explain later on. But we know how the Serbian units and Serbian population, what sort of end they met and what their fate was when they found themselves in encirclement. Let me go back to this decision. I was told that the population should move out or relocate to Otrić and Serb, or rather via Otrić, Serb and Lapac, and that I should write a decision to that effect. They didn't explain this to me in great deal, but they told me to see with the UNPROFOR command, since this was my part of the job, to, whether they could get involved in this. I went back into my office. I drafted this decision, and you can see that it was done in 1645 until 1710. So it took me some 20 minutes, half an hour. Why did I type this out on my own? Well, in order to make sure that typists typing it up would not wreak havoc, and that's why I did it on myself, and that's why you have some typos there. I used an electrical typewriter. No, I used a mechanical typewriter. I brought it over, and the president signed it.
Several minutes later, at 17:10 or 5:10 p.m. on the 4th of August, the so-called president of the Republic of Serbia and Krajina, Milan Martić, signed the order to evacuate the civilian population, and the main staff of the army of the Republic of Serbia and Krajina certified the order at 17:20. Referring to the danger of encirclement at Otrić, Martić's order states that it is being issued because, quote, a large part of the territory of northern Dalmatia and part of Lika have become threatened. "40 minutes after the army certified the evacuation order, at 1800 or 6 p.m. on the 4th of August, Colonel Novaković from the Krajina Serb army meets with UN officials in Knin and asks for fuel to move 32,000 people from Drniš, Benkovac, Obrovac, Knin, and Gračac to Petrovac and Banja Luka in Bosnia. And you have that highlighted in the red boxes. This is a UN document recording what was discussed at the meeting, and you can see that the intention of the Krajina Serb authorities was to gather enough fuel to move the Serb population to Bosnia. The reality was that once they were moving a population in this large numbers, meaning by their own estimates 32,000 people, they had to move them to Bosnia because the only places where there was sufficient logistics to house and feed and shelter 32,000 people was in Bosanski Petrovac and ultimately in Banja Luka in Bosnia. Also at 1800 or at 6 p.m., the evacuation order is broadcast on local Serb radio, and by 2000 or 8 p.m., the evacuation of the southern part of the so-called Krajina is fully underway. Now recall that Knin is in a valley, and on the eastern side of Knin is the Dinara mountain. On the western side is an elevation known as Bulina Strana. At 2000 or 8 p.m. on the 4th, Mrkšić was evacuating the civilian population, but still planned to mount a defense of Knin by withdrawing from the town in the valley and taking up positions on the elevations on the western side of the town at Bulina Strana. He attempted to reorganize his troops in order to mount a decisive defense, but the evacuation order caused his soldiers to flee with their families towards Bosnia, and he could never reorganize his troops in the southern part of the Krajina. So again, if we look at a map of the status of forces at the end of the first day of Operation Storm. The Krajina Serb defenses held strong, as you can see, but the breaches by the forces of General Gotovina and General Markac threatened the capital of Knin and caused Serb leaders to evacuate the civilian population from the southern Krajina. Although they hoped to move the civilian population from the southern Krajina to Bosnia, they intended to get their military forces behind Otric, in other words, above that yellow circle, and to then reestablish a front line there in order to defend the rest of the so-called Krajina from behind that new defense line, which would be established at Otric. However, as I indicated, the chaos created by the decision to evacuate the civilian population caused many of the soldiers to choose to be with their families and to take care of their families rather than maintain military discipline and to stay with their units. The next day, on the 5th of August 1995, at 9:45 a.m., the Croatian army enters and seizes Knin, taking the Krajina Serb capital and, to use the expression, cutting off the head of the snake. As you can see on this map of the situation at that time, the Krajina Serb forces otherwise were still holding quite firm. By the end of the second day of Operation Storm, on the 5th of August 1995, the Croatian army is starting to make more advances now that the Krajina Serb leadership is in disarray with the loss of their capital and the desertion by many of their soldiers due to the loss of morale and desire to flee with their families. Sector North is still holding strong, however, as you can see in the northern part of this map. The Serb defenses in the north are still quite solid. By the end of the third day of Operation Storm, in other words, by the end of 6 August 1995, the Croatian army is now making significant advances and the outcome is now certain. You can see that on the map. The blue areas are now the areas that the Croatian army is taking, and the reddish-pink areas are decreasing in size on the map. As happened in Western Slavonia in May 1995, and has happened in the southern part of the Krajina on the first day of Operation Storm, as the soldiers started to retreat, the civilian population moved with them. And on the 6th of August, that is the third day, President Tudjman comes to Knin and visits the Knin fortress. This sent the message to the holdout Serb forces in the north that the Krajina had fallen and that their efforts to defend it are now hopeless. On the 8th of August 1995, the last of the Krajina troops holding out in Sector North surrender to the Croatian army commander in the north, General Petar Stipetic. Operation Storm is completed on this day, and Croatia has restored its sovereignty over most of its territory. As an epilogue, on the 12th of August 1995, General Mladic was finally able to transfer his troops from eastern to western Bosnia and launched his counterattack against General Gotovina's forces near Grahovo, killing 12 Croatian army soldiers. Croatian leaders at the Brioni meeting had correctly concluded that they only had a short window of opportunity to conduct Operation Storm before Mladic would be in a position to counterattack against General Gotovina's forces in Bosnia. On the 14th of August 1995, Slobodan Milošević, the president of Serbia, convened a meeting of his Supreme Defense Council of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, and in this secret meeting discussed the events of Operation Storm. He unequivocally, in the transcript of that meeting, blames the leadership of the so-called Krajina Serbs for ordering the evacuation. And in the red box, you can see he says, quote, "The question is, who made the decision for the Krajina leadership to leave Krajina? A decision was made which caused the exodus, and it was made in a situation when they had all the conditions provided for their defense." And so you can see that Milosevic unquestionably, in a secret meeting with his Supreme Defense Council, placed all of the blame on the Krajina Serb leadership. It turned out that he's right, that the Krajina Serb army did in fact have very hard and firm defensive positions. They were essentially ready to defend against the Croatian army attack. They had correctly anticipated what the planned directions of attack were by the Croatian army, and it was only the surprise of General Gotovina's attack over the Dinara mountains on the 4th of August with 2 guards brigades that upset the Krajina Serb defense plans and essentially caused them to make decisions that they had not planned to take, meaning they were surprised to have Knin threatened so quickly on the first day of Operation Storm, and that surprise and the fear of being encircled at Otrić led them to order an evacuation of the population, which ultimately destroyed the morale of their army and led to the quick victory of the Croatian army in Operation Storm. So to conclude, the Krajina Serb army was ready for the Croatian army's attack because their intelligence had anticipated the Croatian plans for Operation Storm. General Gotovina surprised the Krajina Serb army by changing course the day before Operation Storm and by deciding to deploy 2 brigades to take Knin immediately in a surprise attack over the Dinara mountain. When the Croatian army launched Operation Storm, the Krajina Serb army's lines held strong in most of the so-called Krajina, but the surprise of General Gotovina's attack caught the Krajina Serbs unprepared, and General Gotovina's forces were able to breach the Serb defenses and put Knin in immediate danger by 3 p.m. on the first day of storm. When General Markać's forces on the Velebit began to create a second breach, which would cause Serbs to be encircled in the southern part of the Krajina at a place called Otrić, Serb leaders ordered an evacuation of their population to Bosnia. This evacuation decision caused panic among civilians and destroyed the morale of the Krajina Serb soldiers, many of whom chose to flee with their families to Bosnia. The evacuation enabled the Croatian army to win in Operation Storm. Finally, Croatia did not expel the Krajina Serb population, as I've demonstrated in this PowerPoint slide. Hopefully, with these facts, it will put to rest some of the myths about what happened in Operation Storm. It was not an easy victory for the Croatian army. There was no use of force to expel the Serb population from Croatia. There was significant strategy involved. There was some good fortune involved, and ultimately the responsibility for the departure of the Krajina Serb population rests with the leadership of the so-called Republika Srpska Krajina, or the so-called Republic of Serbian Krajina. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and have learned something new about the events of Operation Storm.